I launched on the 7th of May this year at Larkman's Boatyard, just below the head of navigation at Melton Bridge on the River Deben, about a mile upstream from Woodbridge Marina. The problem for boats launching here that want to get out of the river on the same tide is that high water at Woodbridge is 45 minutes later than at the bar. So by the time you pass the marina, you're half to 3/4 of an hour into the ebb at the bar. The same applies to boats leaving the marina on more modest tides, where they're unable to cross the sill until close to high water. There were only 4 boats being launched on this tide, and I thought I might get away quite early. But then Larkman slipped the shrimper in ahead of me. That shouldn't have made much difference, but when she was up in strops, the owner decided he wanted to anti-foul the bottom of his keel. Shrimpers may be small boats, but they have very long keels. I finally got away at 2:30 and passed Woodbridge Marina at 2:39, with the tide gauge showing 2.3 metres over the sill. High water at the marina was predicted to be at 2:45, with 2.46 metres. The tide was still flowing quite strongly. To assess the amount of water I could expect at the bar, I always used to use Reed's Walton-on-Naze data and apply second report corrections. However, these days, the online site Tide Times give you exactly the same results without any of the extrapolation. From the marina, it takes me about 1 hour 10 minutes to reach the shallowest part of the bar. That is keeping up a boat speed of about 6.5 knots, taking loader's cut and cutting the bends in the river as much as I dare. Depending exactly when I get launched, that means I arrive at the bar somewhere between 1 3/4 to 2 hours into the ebb at the bar. Therefore, I do my calculations on predicted depth of water based on crossing 2 hours after local high water. Sliding the cursor up to the 1 hour 50 point, you can see that the indicated depth of water is 2.6 metres, i.e. the water is dropping 0.1 of a metre for every 10 minutes. In fact, I realised a while ago that I didn't really need to do these graphs every time, as the height of tide at the bar at the high water plus 2 hour point is unrelated to the range of the tide. I drew the dotted line on the left line for the neap tides a week later. Although the spring line and the neap line are very different, because at neaps you use the blue curve rather than the red one, the result is exactly the same. 2.5 metres after 2 hours, 2.6 metres at 1 hour 50. You can do the same sort of thing using the graphing facility in Tide Times, but it's difficult to get more than a general idea of what's going on. In my experience, on the ebb, both systems tend to overestimate the amount of water on the bar. One factor may be the time of high water. Both Reed's and Tide Times state that high water at Woodbridge Haven is the same as at Harwich. However, Harwich Haven Authority says it's 11 minutes earlier. 11 minutes may not sound very much, but as I've already shown, every 10 minutes equates to another 0.1 less on the bar, so I tend to use the Harwich Haven definition. In general, the further north you go, the earlier high water is. At Bordsey, just 1.5 miles up the coast, Tide Time shows high water as being 16 minutes earlier than at Woodbridge Haven. Unless they're taking the haven to be a point somewhere just into the river, it doesn't make much sense. Although the exact tidal reference point is supposedly marked on the map, it's difficult to give them much credence when the one at Bordsey is 1/4 mile inland. Interestingly, John White, the Deben Estuary pilot, lists Harwich Tide Times and Bordsey Tide Times, not Harwich Haven Times, on his website. Aside from a slight southwesterly movement of the green mid-null buoy, the 2019 Trinity House chartlet is little different from the 2018 one. What it does show, though, is a general narrowing of the channel, with the spur of East Knoll sticking into the channel just abeam Knoll Spit. John White's 2019 chartlet doesn't show any change to the knolls at all, other than a shallowing of the Fisherman's Gat, but it does show even more shallowing in the main channel. The drone view of the estuary, also taken from John Wyeth's website, shows little change from last year, and I really wasn't expecting any surprises when I got down there this year. My main concern was the depth of water. With the calculations predicting 2.5 metres of tide 2 hours after high water, and the chartlet showing 0.2 metres at chart datum, there should be 2.7 metres of water available. But I've always found there to be less water than expected on the ebb. I caught up with the shrimper going through Loder's Cut, but there was plenty of water, both in terms of depth and width, to overtake. Approaching the ferry, it was decision time whether to risk the bar or not. It looked as though I'd be at Knoll Spit 1 hour 50 minutes after local high water. I had 25 knots showing on the anemometer, but with a ground speed of 8.5 knots, that was only a true wind speed of 17 knots. Enough to cause something of a chop over the bar, but nothing horrendous. Negotiating the bar is pretty much the same as last year. Keep to the eastern shore passing Horse Sand, and stay there until past the Red Buoy off Felixstowe Ferry Sailing Club. Then move over close to the western shore by the time you reach the second large red groin after the buoy. Stick close to the shore until past the point of land after the rock cladding, and then head for the green mid-knoll buoy. At this point, I always get the impression I'm sailing downhill, as ground speed builds to 9.5 to 10 knots. I don't know if the white buoy was a lost mooring or a lobster pot marker. If someone put a pot out here, they need shooting. Getting that round your pot round here would be lethal. It was a relief to see the biggish boat that had launched before me safely out to sea, as she drew the same as I did. But on the other hand, she crossed the bar about quarter of an hour earlier. I had to do a factory reset of the instruments at the end of last season. I tried to recalibrate the echo sounder, but only in a soft mud berth. I wasn't sure how accurate it was. A couple of days later, I ran her aground on a gently sloping, firm foreshore and determined that a displayed figure was an under-recording of 0.1 of a metre. Despite looking at the charts, what did take me by surprise was how close Knoll Spit now is to mid-Knoll. That proximity may have been exaggerated, as I had a ground speed of 8.5 to 9 knots, but it only took 40 seconds from being a mean mid-Knoll to a beam Knoll Spit. Being able to see any of East Knoll drying opposite Knoll Spit at this state of tide was a new one on me, and you did get the impression there was a shallower patch extending into the channel from the visible portion of it. It dropped to 2.7 just after Knoll Spit, stayed like that for a while, and then dropped even further to 2.5 for about 5 seconds. In fact, briefly flashing 2.4 for a second or so. At this point, the sounder reading rose to 3 metres and stayed there for the rest of the trip, even though it got a bit bumpy. The question arises, was it wise to cross such a tricky bar, knowing that they only have about half a metre of clearance? I would much prefer not to have done so, but the only other option would have been to go into the marina or pick up a buoy. Only picking up a buoy would have allowed me to leave the next day on a rising tide, and the weather forecast for the 8th was atrocious. Heavy rain and strong winds. I could have easily been stuck for 48 hours. Not a very seaman-like excuse, but as I crossed the bar the previous year in almost identical circumstances, I was fairly certain it would be okay. I had checked the Harwich site for predicted tides against actual tides on the way down the river, and they appeared to be absolutely spot on. But when I got in, I found out there had been a small negative surge of about 0.1 of a metre at the time we were crossing the bar. The corrected minimum depth I experienced was 2.5 metres, and I think we can put that transitory figure down to a trough in the waves. So 2.6 is probably more representative of the actual depth. The Reed's tidal curves indicated that there should be 2.6 metres, to which I had added the 0.2 metres recorded by John White as a minimum depth of chart datum, giving a total minimum depth of 2.8 metres. From that I had deducted 0.1 of a metre to allow for the negative tidal surge when assessing the accuracy of the calculations. That gave 2.7 expected, as against 2.6 actually recorded. Not bad, but still an overestimation which seems to happen every time. I think in future I will knock off 0.1 or 0.2 of a metre from my calculated figures as a personal correction factor. However, these were just my personal observations on the 7th of May. Things change frequently and rapidly on the bar. If you're crossing yourself, make sure to check out the latest state by looking at John White's Deben Estuary pilot site.